Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of the Sustainable Futures seminar series of 2024. Something to celebrate. We've got two speakers today. Got Dr. Maggy Fostier, who's Head of Environmental Sustainability in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health at Manchester, and will present on environmental sustainability projects in the School of Biological Sciences, a welcome addition to our portfolio of final year projects. And she will be followed by Dr. Richard Kirkham, who is a senior lecturer in civil engineering at Manchester, and he'll be presenting on embedding sustainability into project delivery capabilities in government. So without any further ado, I will pass over to Maggy and we can begin. Thanks, Maggy.
Thank you. Sharing my screen. Can I have a note that this is working properly? Emily? Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to present our work here in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health and the School of Biological Sciences. So the talk that I'm going to present is something that we've launched 3 years ago with my colleague, Dr. Ruth Grady, who's in coordinator of our final year project in the school. And the title is Environmental Sustainability Projects. And this is a new and welcome addition to our portfolio of current final year projects. And if you're not from the UK, they're often called capstone projects. I'm going to go through the slides now, talking, when I can, slowly. There's some places where I give loads of examples. I will speed up if I feel like I need to catch up with time. But all the slides will be available after, and we have a blog describing our work available too. So in the School of Biological Sciences, if you're not from there, you might think all the students do lab projects in their final year research project, but it's been several years now that it is not the case. We offer many non-lab projects to try to help students with their employability in the future. We have science communication projects aimed often at the public or to educate pupils or students. And we have bio-stakeholders projects where students write some sort of green papers for supposedly a government. And then we can have employability projects where students create a spin-off company based on cutting-edge biological sciences. And currently, within that particular scope of projects, we can already incorporate environmental sustainability. We had the students who did something on social media to try to communicate on non-bee pollinators. We had the bio-stakeholder projects on factor influencing rewilding ecotourisms in the UK, for example, and keystone species reintroduction. We had an e-learning project regarding producing sustainable palm oil. And we had an enterprise project, for example, looking to set up a spin-off company based on using fungi type of technology to digest plastic and then make construction material out of it. So we can already engage the students with more academic projects such as those. However, what about having student projects to help us advance our own sustainable strategy? We have quite a lot of missions at the University of Manchester and in my faculty, and they can be summarized broadly in the 3 streams here, which is, first of all, we should green our operations within my faculty and on campus. We should engage our campus users with our urban biodiversity on campus. And we basically all aim to create a more sustainable world, and we can do this in 2 ways: by educating and upskilling our staff and students, and by educating and assisting those within our reach of influence. So I wanted projects to support me because the task is really big, and I know how good students can be to support us. So as a result, we decided to create a new scope of projects, which are called the Environmental Sustainable Projects. And those are really action-centered projects. And they can come in any setting, but effectively they sit perfectly between teaching, research, operation, and also outreach and external organizations. So they can help us with our teaching practicals or research laboratory, with our procurement, for example, with the campus sustainability, and then outreach. We can go to schools, to the community, or even they could help businesses. The pilot was set up in 2021-22 with only 3 students, and then we kept on going, and we are increasing slowly the uptake, and this year we have 17 students. So those ESPs, environmental sustainability projects, can involve a wide range of tasks. And here is a list, and most of the time they involve 2 or 3 of them. So students can do an audit or a needs analysis. They can do some desk research into problems or existing solutions. They can do some primary research to help us define problems or explore solutions or monitor progress or estimate impact. They can help us gather data and opinions from users and stakeholders or companies. They can do an intervention. They can design or implement a campaign or an event or an information pack. They can implement a strategy, which is more an operation style of project, which we are starting this year. And this is to implement a strategy there. All of them, we ask them to evaluate the impact of whatever actions they have done on an environmental impact, a cost impact, a practicality, feasibility, and acceptance, a health benefit potentially, or compliance. And at the end of their report, we ask them to provide some recommendation and to provide evidence recommendation, a bit like a consultant report, really. And this is to improve our sustainability or an intervention or to help us with our next steps. So how do they run? Well, in semester 1, all our final year projects, students have to write a small literature review, followed by an oral presentation on the bioscience topic linked to the title of their project. And for this type of projects, like many of our other projects, we train the students because often, in the final year, we ask them to basically embrace a new discipline, which they haven't been trained for before. So here we've set up some training workshops, and the program was a bit more finalized this year. I'm happy with it now. And basically, we give them an introduction to sustainability. We give them a session on campaigning and engaging. And then the following week, they had to actually do some campaigns actions on campus. They have some training from us on circular economy. We have also training on psychological models of behavioral change. Then we train them in 2 tools for sustainability in the lab, which are called LEAF and 6R. Then they are trained on measuring impact, from carbon footprint to life cycle assessments to other types of impact. We teach them how to conduct a project professionally and how to design a survey and analyze the data. So there's quite a hefty program of compulsory sessions that we run in a group in semester 1. And in the second semester, then they carry out their projects. And I think that's probably quite typical of most projects at the University of Manchester. The projects last for about 8 weeks in terms of data collection and doing something. And then they have about 3 weeks to analyze data and write their report. So they have a report at the end, which is marked and moderated, and they get a performance mark as well. So here are the titles that we've had so far, or a collection of them. So some of the students have been assessing more sustainable laboratory products. They could be less toxic for the environment, or they may have a better environmental footprint. They've been helping us working on reducing energy consumption in our labs, such as cold storage or incubation equipment. They've been working on reducing plastics in our labs and our practicals. They've been working on improving the sustainability of students' lab coats provision. Then increasing recycling compliance in the labs. And this time we are also moving away on campus. We've had a project on campus last year. They've been establishing campaigns and events to engage students and staff with sustainability, 6R being the tool for plastic or biodiversity on campus. Soon it would be in school, but perhaps not this year after all. Many students are exploring the benefits of green prescription on campus with students and staff on campus. So all in all, those projects, they are equipping students with knowledge and skills to address environmental sustainability issues. And some of the projects help us solving problems that we have, or helping us getting information to make decisions. And quite a few projects also on the way are helping engaging students and staff. I have a few examples. I'm trying not to go too fast through them, but they are exemplifying things in the lab and things on campus. So here is one of our students from last year who was working on improving waste segregation at the main food hall on campus. This problem was brought to us by the operation side of waste management. They told us they had issues with recycling, so a student was helping with this. In this case, they were favoring a part of the training, which is a model of behavioral change called the COMBI model, which is the psychological strength to the training. So they kind of did three what we call work packages. They first had to do an audit waste segregation. So they had to determine a protocol on how they establish, the current compliance and where the need was. Then they had to try out several strategies. We had kind of 4 goes at it in 8 weeks and keep on monitoring then the waste segregation progress. And they were also tasked with trying to gather key stakeholders' opinion. In this case, they talked to students, but they also talked to staff and waste managers in order to get varied opinion. I'm going to really summarize the report now. They did quite a big report, but in summary, this is the food hall where they were investigating the waste segregation, so the marketplace food hall. And we have kind of 5 streams where we can segregate waste. So first of all, they analyzed the baseline of segregation, and it was very clear that the problem, and this is what we were called for to start with, was that the food waste, the compliance was absolutely terrible. So they did a lot of interventions. And that's the one which was the last one after iterations that they had. So basically providing better signage. I mean, one of the main issues is that sign to start with is a bit confusing because it seems to show a plate there when actually students are only meant to get rid of their food waste. So there was a bit of, no to these and yes to those. And because we have international students, we really learned that you have to move from text-based type of signage to a more direct imagery. So there was some improvement from 2% to 24%, but the improvement could be much better, and we had several recommendations towards better information. And what was very interesting is that the survey from the students showed that they thought they were recycling well. So I think sometimes people come to a belief that wherever they came from, they were doing it well, and they forget that they have to adapt to the rules and the setting where they are, and university being also sometimes different from home. So it's quite complicated, and sometimes people have to understand that they have to relearn, basically, to be compliant. But also, it was very apparent that actually we use a lot of disposable material in the kitchen. We are no longer washing dishes and so on. So it's also not particularly sustainable, and that was highlighted by the surveys. So a next project would be, in terms of legacy, this year we have volunteers who are going in food halls and to try to train people with the signage and so on. But also this is opening the door for a new project where actually, and I think this is tackled this year, to see whether we still have some washing space at the back, whether we should actually make a case for rewashing the dishes instead of using disposable. So now, here is an introduction, very brief, to 6R. So 6R is a guide that we developed with my colleagues and students and staff in my school, initially to try to tackle the waste in our practical classes. And we have described a 6R protocol for labs, and we also have one for home and campus. So just in brief, 6R stands for review what you're doing, reduce and replace plastic by something else, perhaps more sustainable, then reuse and refill, and at last recycle. This was piloted before COVID on 12 practicals, and the savings were really big. I mean, just per year, we were saving about 37,000 plastic items and £3,000, which can then be reinvested into more sustainable analysis of the practicals. And at the moment, we now pay students and GTAs to help us with that. And we have definitely a survey that all our first-year students were completely behind the initiative. So here is one of the pioneer students actually in the pilot here, Calista, and here she was tasked with actually reviewing some of the practicals with 6R. So she had 4 or 5 practicals which she had to review. And then she was observing them and making suggestions to staff, acting as a consultant, just making commentary, establishing the impact and asking them whether they were approving or not. And then she stumbled against a technique which can be done in-house or both. And basically, it was decided to do a cost-benefit analysis to the 2 options. And then she also went into serving in a research lab context, whether this problem was also a problem in the research labs and what the views of the stakeholders were. So here again is the output. She reviewed 4 practicals and established potential savings of more than 2,000 plastic items per year, including some money. Her analysis showed that the handmade version of the gels was not only 3 times cheaper, but used 16 times less plastic than the ones we bought. And as a result of this, for the practical classes where we use those gels really en masse in very big quantities, it was decided that we now would pay GTA students to make them in-house. And this is still much cheaper and providing a job for our students. So the legacy is that last year we started doing that, and we basically managed to save, then will be per year again, £1,000 and 450 items of plastic just by replacing the purchased gels by handmade ones. Finally, so one project was about improving the sustainability of our lab coats provisions for practical classes. This time, the students looked at the circular economy principles, looking at this. And here they had to establish the current impact of our lab coat provision, where we are buying a lab coat each year for students. Consider many scenarios in which we could go to improve the sustainability, and again, consulted with key stakeholders, being the lab technicians, the house services staff, and the students themselves. So this is, again, a long study cut short, and this one I'm hoping to publish as well to other universities. But basically, this is the current situation, where using lab coats has really a big environmental impact. It's not just the plastic, because it's it's a bit of polyester there, but it's all the aspects about growing the raw materials. So we have the pesticides, the land of biodiversity on land and water, the carbon, and the amount of polluted water generated in the countries that are producing those garments. So what has been decided, many scenarios were explored by the students, and basically the recommendation and further analysis showed that what we should do easily and practically is to collect the lab coats after the students are finished with their studies, and we would just basically launder them and reuse them. And by doing so, we're going to save quite a lot of resources. And my project student this year is now implementing this strategy, and I'm hoping to save up to 10,000 K and create some jobs in the process. So I'm just going to accelerate, but we had 2 students also providing potential papers, which are currently in preparation or awaiting publication. So the reflection is that there are many benefits. Those projects are definitely helping us with our strategy. They are also helping embedding sustainability in the curriculum, which we have to do now as part of a QAA requirement. They help us disseminate the sustainability agenda to students and staff, because we do talk about this. We talk about the outcome, we talk about the future projects, and hopefully inspire everyone. And then most of the projects aim to establish some blueprint strategies, which we then can implement with volunteers or staff and follow. The external impact is that hopefully we are equipping our students for 21st century workplace with long-term impact, where they're going to bring those knowledge in the work in future places, in different places. And some of the training sessions that we have been developing are being reused for other courses, for PhD students, master level, and we are soon also going to support some NHS similar projects, but in the clinic setting. Right, just to finish here, just to say that this initiative fits with two other initiatives at the University of Manchester. As far as I know, there may be other initiatives too. One of them, which was led by our psychology department, which is a national initiative called 1 in 5 Projects on Sustainability. This is more academically driven, and the idea, and this is something I want to aspire for faculty, is that we try to have 1 in 5 projects that deal somehow with environmental sustainability. And there's a blog for more information. And then the other one, which I believe has been presented as part of this seminar series before, that's the Living Labs that Jen O'Brien has created within the University of Manchester. This one is a bit more partners driven, is where partners can provide to students authentic projects, again, project titles that matches to the SDGs, and students can then opt as part of their existing assessment portfolio to tackle those. I think I want to stop there because I think I'm running over time. So hopefully it's all been clear, but very happy to answer questions and very happy to share any material we have as well.
Thank you, Maggie. That was really interesting. They've got a Q&A now, so if anyone's got any questions, there's still time to put them in the chat. And if we don't get round to them, I think Maggie mentioned earlier that you could dip into the chat to answer them. But a few here. Is there a potential to tackle the issue of compostable packaging on campus through one of these projects, do you think?
Yes, so they could tackle it in two ways. So first of all, either we have a scheme which is already existing and basically they could enforce it or create material in order to evaluate the impact or inform people better. But I think at the moment we are actually not recycling much of the compostable packaging, because for the food one, it doesn't go in the kitchen waste that we have decided upon. And sometimes some of the material is not really compostable. They are compostable only in certain ways and so on. So we could do the exploratory work if we wanted to try to do the desk research work, to try to establish what kind of waste stream we could have. Particularly in our lab, we are starting to receive quite weird products, packaging, such as hay or hemp or wool. They're not weird, but I think people assume that we can, for example, compost those products. And actually, at the moment, this is not the case. Our waste manager, Simon, is alone trying to deal with all this, and it's not easy. And basically, I think sometimes this is where students could help with some of those questions under his guidance. I hope it answered the question. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I think there is everyone's trying to find more sustainable methods, but it's having those sort of processes in place, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And if I can just say so as well, if we start in gathering better information, we can also help our suppliers, because they think they are doing the right thing. And sometimes they only see, we're not completing the full life cycle assessment of their products. So unless it's disposed of properly, it may not end up being more sustainable than the previous option they were using. So that's a tricky question. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Lydia asks in the chat, have any of your students shown interest in working with schools who are already doing some environmental projects? For example,
yes.
On local food growing.
Lydia, yes. And well, we've been trying to work with schools, but I've been in touch with Lydia and we know Rachel, who coordinates me, and the Manchester Environmental Education Network. But unfortunately, we didn't manage to talk on time with each other, and I think we can't have a school now to work with, so I'm going to have to redirect those students somewhere else. But I'm really keen to work with schools, and I want to do that next year. We just need to be better organized to line up the schools earlier on in time.
A question of my own for me. I was thinking about this earlier, actually. Could students be encouraged to improve the environment around halls? I'm thinking of sort of campuses like the Fallowfield, where there's a lot of green space, and we could perhaps get them to work together on biodiversity projects, maybe, and that'd be really good.
Well, that's exactly what one of my project students wants to do this year. So we're going to meet with the landscape team next week. And so he has some ideas, and he's going to pitch them to them. And he's also going to gather some views of students to try to gather all these ideas and start pitching them to to the landscaping team. Potentially, we may do a little test on something as well. He's a zoology student, so he might be able to monitor some of the biodiversity. Although the only slight caveat is that those projects run usually before Easter, so the biodiversity is not huge, then it's quite hard to monitor something. But his idea, I mean, his plan is to put strategy forward really and to pitch the idea, but with data, or at least with the academic data behind what the benefit could be. So let's watch this space, and hopefully he will gather some views from wide-ranging views as well. And but he's really keen on that. That was definitely the idea I wanted to put forward.
That sounds really good. Yeah. I've got a comment there just come through. Sami says, one comment I would add is that food recycling may need improving across campus, not just in the food hall. The green food bins used to be collected within departments too, but I think the responsibility was put on staff and departments to sort green bins themselves, and so perhaps collection is lessened. So I think it's about
okay, that's not my understanding. We publish. I started publishing a quarterly newsletter in the school for the good newsletter of environmental sustainability in FBMH, and we have an article just coming on kitchen waste by Simon Atkinson, who's the waste manager. And well, having read the blog that is about to be published next week or so, it should be the house services that really collect those bags. So I think maybe all of us in our schools, we need to be clearer that house services need to do that, and that'll be something that's reported perhaps to me, and then I can pass on to house services. But house services should collect those bags every 2 or 3 days, if not every day. So because in the summer in particular, it can create issues with flies or things like this. The last thing we want is rats or mouse in our kitchens. So we want a collection, very frequent one, really.
Great. I know we get through a lot of coffee and tea in our building. I think most academic buildings do. So yeah, we would be great to be able to compost all that. And then a certain question. Emily just says, could you put the blog link in the chat so we can have a look through it?
Yes, I will do that when we're off. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you again, Maggie. That was really interesting, and thanks for answering the questions. I'll hand over now to Richard, if you could.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Emily, for taking control of the slides. I'm as bad at driving as I am of pressing PowerPoint progression buttons, so do bear with me today. And thank you ever so much for joining us for this this seminar. So my name's Richard. I'm from the Thomas Ashton Institute for Risk and Regulatory Research at the University of Manchester, and I also live in the School of Engineering. And one of the things that we try to do here at Manchester is promote interdisciplinarity through cross-collaboration with institutes and platforms. So I'm really, really grateful for colleagues in the Sustainable Institute today for the invitation to come and speak to you, and for funding the project which we are looking at today, which is embedding sustainability into project delivery capabilities in government. And just for interest, the picture that you can see on the screen there is the flood alleviation scheme at Leeds. Not one of the sexiest of projects, but it's a big civil engineering project. It's really important in terms of protection of flooding in Leeds and the wider city region. And Leeds is the birthplace of civil engineering. So John Smeaton FRS is the father of civil engineering. So I thought I might show that picture as well. So next slide, please, Emily. Okay, so I'll begin with a bit of context. Major projects and project delivery in general is a really, really important part of the work of the civil service. So those that are not familiar, there are three main kind of professions within the civil service. There's the policy profession, the project delivery profession, and then the operational delivery profession. There are other professions too, but in the context of this particular study, those are the three main ones. So they often say that the policy is the thinking, the project delivery is the doing, and the operational delivery is the landing of services into society. So the stuff that we kind of see day-to-day passport agency, for example, and such forth. So the reason why I mention this is that the scale and complexity of major projects in government has been increasing steadily over time, as you can see on the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide there. So at the present moment, the current portfolio of major projects is £805 billion. And this is a very large amount of money in the round. And many of these projects and programmes are geared towards tackling some strategic challenges that are set out in the National Infrastructure Strategy, transforming infrastructure performance, and in support of the UK's commitments to UN Sustainable Goals 2030 and net zero by 2050. So what we're kind of saying here is that if the government and future governments are likely to be able to meet the targets that are set out in those policy documents and those ambitions, then major projects are going to be a crucial enabler of that. So next slide, please. So what's the challenge? Well, we've been working at Manchester and with other colleagues across the UK to raise the profile of the project delivery profession in government. And we've been relatively successful at doing that. But one of the things that we've discovered as part of that work is that the guidance which underpins the work of project delivery professionals in government, which is the Project Delivery Profession Capability Framework, appears to be quite silent on issues around sustainability. And that's quite interesting because in reality, if we're going to have a project delivery system that's world class, that's the stated ambition, certainly in government communications, then by implication, the emphasis on sustainability should be strong. But the current guidance published by the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which is really good, really comprehensive, talks about the important principles of requirements management, stakeholder analysis, planning, scheduling, risk management, quality, change control, all the kind of things that we generally expect to see in any form of kind of project management guidance or policy, but sustainability not there. Now it's probably likely that sustainability is implicit in a number of the technical competencies that you can see on the screen there. But we kind of think that if there is really going to be a possibility of achieving the ambitious targets that are set out in the policy documents I mentioned beforehand, then there needs to be a greater emphasis on sustainability skills within the project delivery profession and in the technical competence guidance that you can see there. So that's one of our challenges. Next slide, please, Emily. The next challenge really is what we often refer to as the Valley of Death. The Valley of Death is the relationship between policy objectives and then the projects and programs that enable those policy objectives to be delivered into society. You would imagine that it's a relatively straightforward process of being able to say, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to go about doing it, and then getting the funding in place to be able to achieve that. But there are a number of idiosyncrasies, particularly in the way that the UK government works and how parliamentary cycles influence decision making, which sometimes make it really, really difficult actually for project delivery professionals to land successful projects and programs when the policy landscape that's initiated the project or program may have changed radically. And I'm sure you'll have noticed by following the news recently that we've seen quite a lot of ministerial churn, particularly in some departments that have quite significant roles to play in tackling sustainability related issues. There's not much we can really do about the 5-year electoral cycle problem. That's the mechanisms of our democracy. But what we definitely can do is improve the communication and coordination between policy professionals and project delivery professionals, so that what is envisaged can be delivered within the resources and capability of the civil service, and then ultimately deliver benefits to society. And that final point is really, really crucial. So projects are not a means to an end. They are the mechanisms by which we deliver good public services. So it follows that a strong and enduring focus on sustainability is really, really important. It's probably also worth mentioning in this slide here that at the top of the screen, you will identify that there are a number of different, what are described as HM Treasury business case stages. So ordinarily, a policy, once it's been developed, will then progress through a series of business case stages, beginning with a strategic outline case, then an outline case, followed by a full business case, and eventually, depending on how long and complex the programme or project is, there may be revisions of the business case as the policy landscape changes. It's at these points in the business case that messages, targets around sustainability should be explicitly made. And that's because the business case is the North Star which guides the direction of any project or programme. It's what holds, or it's what's used by scrutiny panels to hold the senior responsible owner for a project to account during the project delivery life cycle and at the end. So this is not just necessarily something that the project delivery profession need to worry about. I think it's a Treasury issue as well, and hopefully through work that we're doing here and elsewhere, we'll be able to make those views known. So next slide, please, Emily. So as part of this project, we've been trying to look at the academic and grey literature to understand whether what we've observed in the government project delivery profession in terms of sustainability skills is evidenced more widely, i.e. outside of the civil service. So we've now completed that rapid evidence assessment, and as a consequence of that, we've identified three main thematic areas that we think are really, really important in terms of potentially contributing to improvements in, inter alia, the project delivery capability framework. So there were three areas you can see here on the screen. The first of those are individual competencies, i.e. people competencies. Now, within the civil service, there is an opportunity for officials to be able to demonstrate the skills that they've acquired in the context of sustainability through their internal kind of performance review process. But of course, many practicing project professionals in the civil service may be members of chartered institutions like the APM, for example, the Association of Project Management, or the Institution of Civil Engineers. And as part of those professional development requirements, they will be doing work to develop competencies in these. So maintaining a focus on supporting individual skills development in sustainability, we think is really, really important. Secondly, tools and technology. So there are a range of standards and methodologies, measures, indicators, and certifications which can support project professionals in demonstrating the sustainability credentials of a project or a programme. So, for example, in civil engineering projects and building projects, there are certifications called SQL and BREEAM. They have some benefits. I won't go into the critique of them today, but they do provide a focus to be able to measure or demonstrate that designs and construction of buildings or civil infrastructure have sustainability in mind. And then finally, we've got organisational capabilities, and that essentially means processes. So this will refer to the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainability, as well as across the whole of the project life cycle. So it's really important that departments in government who are ultimately sponsoring major projects and programmes, like the Leeds flood alleviation scheme, are able to articulate how those particular projects and programmes contribute to a broader set of strategic objectives within the department, which ultimately lead up to contributing to the United Kingdom government's efforts to deliver benefits to society. So those are the three main areas that we've kind of uncovered in terms of our initial literature review so far. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Emily. Crucially, if there's going to be change, that change will invariably come from the top. And in the context of how government projects are organised, the senior responsible owner is a really, really crucial role. Now, this is a job that's not for the faint-hearted. Generally, only highly experienced civil servants or people who have joined from industry to join the civil service will be appointed to these roles. But the SRO is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the business case, which I identified in the earlier slide, can be delivered and that the benefits and outcomes are achieved. Now, that second part is problematic because often senior responsible owners move between different departments or different projects and programs and may not stay with the program for the life of its duration. So that can be an issue. But in terms of delivery of the project or program, that individual is ultimately accountable to Parliament through the relevant select committee. And I have no doubt that in future years, those select committees will be asking questions of SROs in relation to how their leadership is characterising the story of sustainability within their project and programme, and how they are supporting project professionals working within it to develop or to acquire and develop sustainability skills. So the SRO role is really, really important. But having a look through a number of SRO appointment letters for major projects that have been published over the last couple of years, these are commonly referred to as osmolarly letters, there is rarely any mention of the word sustainability. And that's something I think that we need to see change. If the SRO is required as part of their brief to be able to demonstrate ultimately to Parliament that they've done everything within their power to create a project environment that delivers sustainable outcomes, I think we'll be in a much better position. So that's that slide. Next one, please, Emily. So so what does that sort of look like in practice? So we've taken the role of an SRO as an example of the kind of competencies that we think need to be articulated potentially within the osmolarly letter, but then also to think about some of the broader organisational capabilities that might need to exist within the government department that the SRO belongs to, and then finally what sorts of tools and techniques or ways of working will be able to support the delivery of those competencies. So I won't go into details of all of the boxes here because we don't have time. But in terms of training and professional development, we think there's a really important piece of work that needs to be done here around communication, leadership, and knowledge sharing as well. And I'm really pleased to see that on the call today we've got a civil servant who's joined us, who's been leading on an outstanding project within a non-ministerial government department. And some of the work that we've seen going on there is really an exemplar for the wider civil service. But unfortunately, one of the frustrations of the machinery of government is often that departments don't share best practice or are able to find where that best practice actually lies. And I think we as academics have a hugely valuable role and opportunity in working with government officials to help change that for the better. So this is part of a broader range of activities that are taking place within Ashton to foster improved civil service and academic collaborations. And yeah, just a couple of other things just to mention there as well. So in the second column, the organisational capabilities, we mention benefits quite regularly in that section. Benefits realisation is really now becoming a major focus area, particularly in government project delivery. And that's because there is an increased requirement now to improve evaluation of public spending. Most recent analysis of the government major projects portfolio, which I showed in the second slide, suggests that only 8% of government spending is subjected to any form of rigorous evaluation, which is actually quite concerning, because if I take away my academic experience and background and place myself as a general member of the public who pays a lot of tax every month to the revenue, I'd like to know that that money has been spent wisely and is delivering benefits to citizens and society. And the only way you'll be able to really do that is through a better discipline of benefits management. So we think that if we at least go through that lens and promote sustainability within it, we're probably going to get perhaps more traction than just say it's really, really important that you focus on sustainability because we've got a net zero ambition for 2050. Which for many people is a very long time in the distance, and they're probably retired by then anyway and might not necessarily care too much, unfortunately. So that's the penultimate slide, Emily, if you wouldn't mind. So there is already good stuff happening elsewhere, which suggests to us that the challenge isn't as difficult as we first conceived. And within the building architecture world, there is a huge amount of work that's been done, particularly by the Royal Institute of British Architects, to promote sustainability thinking throughout the project lifecycle. So the plan of work that you can see on the screen there is almost similar to the life cycle I showed you earlier, featuring the Treasury business cases. It's just that in this case here, this is specifically related to building projects. But what this does do is challenge the architect or the project leader to bake in sustainability targets right from stage 0, which is the strategic context. The idea being that as you progress then through stages 1 to 6 and ultimately into occupation of the building, you've got a constant, relentless focus on sustainability, and all your decisions are respectful of the need to meet the particular targets that the client or the contracting authority has set out. And it's good to see that certainly in major government projects where there is a significant amount of building work taking place, these principles are well embedded. So it might simply be that we can look at what works well in building and see if it applies well in other contexts where carbon emissions are an issue, defence, for example, or government transformation. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation, and very happy to take any questions from the floor, or indeed afterwards. You have my contact details by email on the front slide should you need it. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Richard. It's really interesting, especially in the context of recent failures in infrastructure projects, mentioning no names. It may or may not be to do with high-speed rail. So we've got a question from Lydia. So saying, it's so important to have influence on those who initiate specifications and evaluation of major infrastructure projects. This requires political lobbying too. Are you helping uni staff in politics and business to understand this issue? And I'd probably add that we could add in policy at Manchester there as well.
Yes, we are, and I have a reasonable amount of experience of writing parliamentary submissions to select committees anyway, and have given oral evidence in the past. So I'm reasonably familiar with how we can go about trying to put information in front of people which will help them to challenge the status quo. And yes, we are through Thomas Ashton talking to policy at Manchester how to support that as well. The other thing to mention is that you may be aware that Economic and Social Research Council have just refreshed the Areas of Research Interest website, the ARI website. That a repository of research questions that are posed by different government departments, which may be of interest to academics when writing proposals to UKRI, for example. I lead the Cabinet Office one of that, or a part of it, should I say. But what we also need to try and do is support the public in their understanding of this problem. And at the moment, generally, the questions that are asked in Parliament about things like High Speed 2 are, how much is it going to cost? When's it going to get finished by? Not what are the long-term benefits of doing so. So, for example, High Speed 2 would create a long and enduring supply chain in, say, steel manufacturing, which would be really helpful for other things like building submarines or whatever other areas of defence spending require large amounts of steel. It also creates a stimulus for increased demand for engineers. We need civil engineers and mechanical engineers to build things like High Speed 2, which is good for Manchester University because we teach civil engineers. So it's the bigger systems thinking that's the challenge, and that's not quite there yet.
Very, very true. I mean, I was at Scarborough Steel Works last week, and their entire output is rails, so it's difficult to see a future for that. Lydia, just a follow-up question. She says that this advice also applies to all staff who are responsible for procurement across the university, and asks what training is available at the moment and how can we support our own officers.
So I'm not as au fait with that, I'm afraid. The one thing that we sort of required to do in my other role as a lecturer in the civil engineering department is to work with our project teams and our estates colleagues to be able to, feed research in that we're doing to support the University of Manchester's procurement practices. We've been limited in success, I think, unfortunately, in that area. Bit of a pity because there's a lot of construction work going on in Manchester, and using those as live labs to help with teaching is hugely powerful. In terms of procurement, the one thing I would say that's relevant to this particular presentation, and I don't think it really applies to Manchester, but definitely to local authorities, central government, local government, is the social value model, which is available on the Treasury website. Provides a prescription for how you might quantify the difficult to measure benefits that occur in projects and programs where you are attempting to create a behaviour change or a benefit to citizens and society through a long-term intervention. We aren't very good at understanding those benefits, unfortunately, so we are still very much driven by this reductionist time cost quality view of projects, but not recognising how the wider social value might be delivered. That's a weakness in the business case model as well, because it's very much geared to measuring and quantifying benefits. But actually, a lot of what the government does do is actually really good in the long run, but there's nobody accounting for it because politicians have moved on to another project or programme that they want to promote and sponsor and say to the electorate, look at me, vote for me because, or vote for my party because we've done some brilliant new schools or hospitals or nuclear power stations or whatever.
And what challenges does government face in delivering net zero?
So the challenges are very well described in the integrated review. So the nation faces three serious threats: it's cyber security, energy security being two of them, and the geopolitical landscape that characterises our world at the moment is increasingly worrying. So I think many nation states that are significant emitters of carbon are engaged in other activities which are a distraction from working towards a more sustainable planet. And until that situation resolves itself, I'm not very optimistic for the future. The United Nations obviously is a key promoter through the UN Sustainable Goals, but I imagine now that the UN system is very much dominated by attempting to resolve some of the political and conflicts that are taking place in the Middle East and in other regions of the world.
Thank you. And probably the final question is from Sami, who asks, have you seen a shift in the types of sustainable industry partners and materials being used in construction? For example, greater carbon capture methods and use of modified concrete.
Yeah, so carbon capture is kind of goes through fashions, but I live relatively close to Drax Power Station, which is a biomass burning power station. So they've been looking at promotion of a carbon capture scheme for a long time. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer myself. I'm surprised it's not made as much traction as it has, but anyway, we are where we are with that. Then in broader things, yeah, I mean, I always felt that one of the things that High Speed 2 didn't really do very well in its business case is demonstrate the sustainable benefits of taking more vehicles off the road, particularly freight traffic, because that's created by the capacity increases that you get on the East Coast and West Coast mainline through High Speed 2. So there's a lot more work, I think, that needs to be done to try and improve the way in which we demonstrate and account for the benefits of sustainable actions in projects and programs. But again, it needs to come from a ministerial perspective as well, because in terms of accountability of projects and programs, the minister will attend Parliament as the kind of person responsible for the policy, and the SRO or the accounting officer will go and talk about delivery and how they've spent the money that the Treasury has given them against the policy objectives. And sometimes that system doesn't always work in the best interest of achieving sustainability.
Thank you. So on that note, I think we'll probably finish. So thank you, Maggie and Richard, for your excellent talks, and thanks everyone for coming. We've got another one next month, I think. So do come to that, register for that, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.